So usually when we think about the things that can completely ruin our lives, or, on the flip side, the things that can catapult us to massive success, we tend to look for the wrecking balls.
Right, the defining moments, the big ones.
Exactly. We're always scanning the horizon for these massive, earth-shattering cinematic events, a giant lottery win, or maybe a sudden disastrous bankruptcy.
Or like a chance meeting with a billionaire on an elevator.
Yeah, or a tragic accident. We're culturally conditioned to expect a movie montage that just naturally leads to this single explosive turning point.
We really are. We want the biopic moment.
But the reality that I took away from our source material today is that the biggest threats to your trajectory, and actually the greatest engines for your success, aren't wrecking balls at all.
No, they're not.
They're termites.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Termites.
Right. They're invisible, tiny, seemingly harmless day-to-day choices. Choices so small they don't even register in your conscious mind while you're making them.
But over time, those termites will either build a mansion or they'll just eat your foundation down to dust.
Exactly. And that framing fundamentally shifts how we evaluate our daily routines, doesn't it?
It has to. Because the reality of human achievement is, well, it's profoundly uncinematic.
It's boring.
It is. It's tedious, it's quiet, it's rarely dramatic, and it is entirely driven by this sort of invisible math.
Which brings us to the core mission of this deep dive. Today, we are taking a hard look at the operating system of success.
Stripping away all the gimmicks.
Yes. Stripping away the gimmicks, the overnight success myths, the modern self-help fluff. We are unpacking a foundational text today. We're diving into The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy.
And, I think it's really worth establishing the author's background before we even get into the mechanics of his philosophy.
Yeah, give us the context, because he's not just some guy.
No, Darren Hardy's not an armchair theorist.
Yeah.
We aren't analyzing someone who just, synthesized a few psychological studies and decided to market a life hack book. We're looking at a practitioner. This is someone who was earning a six-figure income by the time he was 18 years old.
Wait, 18?
18, yeah. And he reached millionaire status by 24.
That is wild.
And it gets better. By 27, he had built a company generating $50 million in revenue.
Wow. Okay, so he actually has the receipts.
He has the receipts.
Yeah.
And later on, taking the helm as the publisher of Success magazine, his primary function was basically to sit across from the absolute top tier of global achievers.
Like CEOs, athletes, that kind of thing.
Exactly. CEOs, Olympic gold medalists, visionaries. And his job was to filter out the survivorship bias and the PR spin to find the actual common denominator of sustained achievement.
So he had a literal front row seat to greatness.
Yeah, he did.
And what he found, and what he argues in the book, is that modern society has just been completely brainwashed by what he calls a microwave mentality.
The microwave mentality is such a pervasive cultural shift.
Yeah.
We expect 30-minute photos, overnight mail, instant streaming.
Fast food.
Fast food, right?
Yeah.
And by extension, we start expecting instant wealth and instant physical transformation.
Like those 30-day ab workouts.
Exactly. Our baseline expectation has become instant gratification. And the moment a pursuit requires any protracted friction, the default response for most people is just to quit.
But Hardy's personal baseline was forged in a completely different environment, wasn't it?
Radically different. He grew up under a philosophy that his father summarized as showing bone.
Showing bone. Okay, let's unpack this, because I was reading the descriptions of his childhood, and it sounds less like a suburban upbringing and more like a literal boot camp.
Oh, it was intense. His father was a single parent and a former university football coach.
That explains a lot.
Right. He operated as the absolute antithesis of the microwave mentality. His parenting style was heavily rooted in a very literal interpretation of no pain, no gain.
Didn't he have a sign in the garage?
He did. He painted a giant no pain, no gain sign on the wall of their garage. And that garage shared a wall with young Darren's bedroom. Yeah. So every single morning at 6 a.m., his alarm clock was the repetitious, pile-driving sound of heavy iron pounding against concrete.
At 6 a.m.?
Every day. Every day. Regardless of the weather. His father was out there doing strongman deadlifts, power cleans, lunges. The discipline was mechanized.
And those expectations trickled down too. Darren wasn't just sitting inside watching his dad work out.
Oh, definitely not. He was handed a chore list that would break most modern teenagers.
I mean, we're talking pulling weeds, raking leaves, sweeping, vacuuming, dusting. But that phrase you mentioned, showing bone, that's what really stood out to me as the ultimate encapsulation of this mindset.
It's a striking phrase. It originates from his father's coaching days.
Right.
On his team, a player was not permitted to come out of a game just because they were hurting or, fatigued,
They had to be actually injured.
practically incapacitated.
Right.
So as the story goes, a quarterback once asked to be pulled off the field, and the coach Darren's dad told him, "Not unless you're showing bone."
Meaning a compound fracture.
Exactly. And the kid pulled back his shoulder pads, and his collarbone was visibly broken and protruding.
Oh my gosh.
Only then was he given permission to sit out. And his father applied this exact same ruthless logic to raising his son.
So no sick days for a common cold.
Nope. You did not stay home from school unless you were actively hemorrhaging, vomiting, or showing bone.
Okay, I have to pause here because when I process that kind of extreme, unyielding environment, a part of me really recoils.
Sure. It's jarring to modern sensibility.
Right. It's one thing to teach a child a strong work ethic. It is another entirely to foster an environment where a kid feels they have to literally be broken to earn rest.
It's a fine line.
It is. I look at this and I wonder, and I think a lot of you listening are probably wondering this too, is this borderline traumatic intensity truly a prerequisite for success?
That's the big question.
Like, does someone need to hear iron clanking at 6 a.m. and be denied basic grace to build resilience? In a modern context where we understand the severe biological and psychological tolls of chronic stress, this approach feels highly problematic, maybe even toxic.
It's a completely valid critique. And if we look at the text, Hardy himself seems to recognize the extremity of it.
Does he?
He does. He jokes with his father today about being engineered into an addictive overachiever,
Ah, okay.
which definitely hints at the psychological burden of that upbringing. However, the utility of examining this isn't to replicate the specific grueling parenting tactics.
We don't need to paint no pain, no gain on our garages.
All right, please don't. The value lies in extracting the underlying philosophy at Predenham.
Yeah.
You don't need the freezing garage or the draconian sick day policy to capture the essence of what his father was actually teaching.
Which was what, exactly?
A framework of 100% personal responsibility.
Okay, so we're separating the harsh methodology from the core lesson.
Precisely. His father's overarching thesis was essentially an equalization formula.
An equalization formula, what does that mean?
It dictates that it does not matter what innate talent you lack. It doesn't matter if you aren't the smartest person in the room.
Right.
If your competitor is naturally more gifted, if they're more intelligent, or if they possess more resources, you still have a mechanism to beat them.
You just outwork them.
You simply outwork them 3 to 4 times over. If your free throw percentage is abysmal, you shoot 1,000 free throws a day for a month.
If you're struggling with a subject in school, you hire a tutor and study all summer.
Exactly. While everyone else is at the pool, there are no systemic excuses permitted in this framework.
It reframes a lack of natural ability from a permanent barrier into a simple variable that you can just solve with sweat equity.
And it removes the concept of victimhood entirely.
That is a crucial shift. Because by adopting that mindset, you are declaring that your outcomes are entirely within your locus of control.
Yes, but we have to acknowledge something here.
What is that?
If sheer brute force effort and unyielding consistency are the foundation, we then have to ask how that raw energy actually converts into the kind of massive, scalable success Hardy achieved.
Because plenty of people work themselves to the bone their entire lives and never see $1 million, let alone build a $50 million company.
Exactly. Raw effort isn't enough on its own.
So what's the missing piece?
That discrepancy is what leads us to the mathematical engine of this entire philosophy, the compound effect itself.
The invisible math.
Yes. Effort must be applied through a specific equation to generate those outsized returns. The formula is incredibly straightforward in theory, but almost universally abandoned in practice.
Give it to us.
It goes like this. Small, smart choices plus consistency plus time equals a radical difference.
Small, smart choices plus consistency plus time.
Equals a radical difference.
Okay, I want to look at the classic thought experiment he uses to illustrate this, because it highlights exactly why our brains are so poorly equipped to handle this formula.
The magic penny.
The magic penny. So, imagine you're offered a choice today. Option A. You receive $3 million in cold, hard, tax-free cash instantly.
Sounds pretty good.
Sounds amazing. But then there's option B. You receive a single penny, but that penny will double in value every single day for 31 days.
Now, intellectually, anyone who has taken a basic finance or economics class knows they're supposed to choose the compounding penny.
Right. It's a trick question.
The math is a known quantity. Yet human psychology, which is heavily influenced by that microwave mentality we discussed earlier, makes living out the reality of option B incredibly agonizing.
Let's trace the actual timeline of that agony because I think it's fascinating. Suppose I take the $3 million in cash and you take the doubling penny, and we go our separate ways.
Okay.
On day 5, you have exactly 16 cents.
16 cents.
Meanwhile, I have $3 million. I'm buying a house, I'm flying first class, I'm buying sports cars, and you can't even buy a stick of gum.
I'm feeling pretty bad about my choice.
It gets worse. By day 10, your penny has grown to $5.12.
Stop there and consider the psychological state of the person holding the penny.
It's rough.
For a third of the month, they have maintained their discipline. They rejected the immediate, massive payoff for this smart, long-term strategy.
And their reward is a $5 bill, while their counterpart is living like royalty.
The disparity creates massive cognitive dissonance. And this exact temporal gap, this delay between effort and visible reward, that is the graveyard of almost all positive habit formation.
It's why a new gym membership is completely abandoned by the second week of January.
Precisely. You went to the gym for 2 weeks, you look in the mirror, and you don't look like an Olympian yet, so you quit.
So back to the penny. Day 20 arrives. We are 2/3 of the way through the timeline. You have been watching this money double relentlessly for 20 days.
What do I have?
You are sitting on $5,243.
Okay, $5,000.
But I still have $3 million. If you are the person with the penny on day 20, you are actively regretting your life choices. You look like a fool to everyone around you.
But this is where the architecture of compounding finally crests the horizon of visibility.
The hockey stick curve.
Exactly. The growth curve has been flattening out, building base mass for weeks, and now it goes vertical.
So on day 29, I still have my $3 million, but your penny has compounded to $2.7 million.
I'm catching up.
On day 30, the penny blows past the cash offer, hitting $5.3 million. And on the final day, day 31, the penny is worth $10,737,418.24.
It is a staggering leap.
It really is. For 29 straight days, the person who took the instant cash felt like an absolute genius. They were winning the race by a mile.
And then, in the span of 38 hours, they're eclipsed so violently, they're left with less than a third of the final wealth.
The deception is in the latency, isn't it?
That's the perfect word for it. Latency. The results of the compound effect are entirely invisible until the very end of the curve, at which point they become suddenly aggressively exponential.
Now, while the math of a doubling penny is, a fun parlor trick, applying this to the messy reality of human behavior is where the concept gets real traction.
Right, because we aren't compounding pennies, we're compounding habits.
Exactly. And the book uses this fascinating narrative of 3 friends to ground this math in daily life.
Larry, Scott, and Brad.
Let's talk about them. These are 3 guys who grew up together, they live in the same neighborhood, they earn the exact same $50,000 salary.
They possess average health, and they're all dealing with that slight bit of middle-age marriage flab.
Right, so they are identical baseline variables. It's the perfect controlled experiment.
Exactly. We get to observe how microscopic behavioral divergences alter their destinies over time.
Okay, so we start with Larry.
Larry is our control group. He decides to do absolutely nothing differently.
He's content.
He's content. He plods along, maintaining the exact same routines, the same diet, the same relationship dynamics he always has.
Then we have Scott. Now, Scott decides to introduce a few tiny, seemingly inconsequential, positive changes into his routine.
And we really need to emphasize tiny. We aren't talking about heroic, sweeping overhauls here.
Right. He's not joining a CrossFit gym and going vegan overnight.
No. He commits to reading 10 pages of a good book every day.
10 pages, that's what, 10 minutes of reading?
Barely. And he swaps out his morning radio show for 30 minutes of educational or inspirational audio on his commute.
Okay. And diet-wise?
He decides to cut a mere 125 calories a day.
And I mean, from a physiological standpoint, 125 calories is a rounding error. It's nothing.
It is barely perceptible. It's swapping a regular soda for a seltzer water, or asking for mustard instead of mayonnaise on a deli sandwich.
He also adds a short walk to his day, right?
Yeah, amounting to a couple of thousand extra steps, which is less than a mile.
So highly doable, incredibly low friction.
Exactly. And finally, we have Brad.
Brad.
Brad makes choices that go in the opposite direction. But crucially, his choices are equally small and non-dramatic.
What does Brad do?
He buys a massive new flat-screen TV because he wants to watch more cooking shows.
Okay, seems harmless.
Right. But he gets inspired by the shows, And he starts baking muffins and making cheesy casseroles. So he adds about 125 extra calories to his daily intake.
So he's plus 125, Scott is minus 125.
Exactly. He also installs a small bar in his family room and decides to have one extra alcoholic drink per week to unwind.
One extra drink a week? Not a day, a week.
A week?
Okay, so we fast forward 5 months. What is the observable difference between Larry, Scott, and Brad?
Zero.
Nothing.
Absolutely none. You could put them on a medical scale, you could audit their bank accounts, you could observe their marriages. There is no perceivable variance.
Because the compounding is still in that invisible fractional phase, just like the penny.
Exactly. So we jump to 10 months.
Still nothing.
Still nothing. They all look and sound exactly the same.
But then we reach month 25.
Month 25 is where the curve is bending. Measurable, undeniable differences begin to manifest.
And by month 27, the divergence is expansive.
And by month 31, which, if we do the math, represents 940 days into this behavioral experiment, the contrast is shocking.
Let's run the actual math on Scott's choices. So he cut 125 calories a day for 940 days.
That totals 117,500 calories saved.
Wow. And when you divide that by the roughly 3,500 calories it takes to burn a pound of fat, Scott has lost 33.5 pounds.
Without ever going on a diet. And conversely, Brad, who added 125 calories a day with his muffins and his weekly drink,
He gained 33.5 pounds.
Right. So you now have a 67-pound physical disparity between two friends who started at the exact same baseline.
Entirely generated by the presence or absence of a condiment and a short walking habit.
It's mind-blowing when you frame it like that.
Yeah.
But the physical weight is just the surface metric.
Right, because Scott also invested roughly 1,000 hours into reading and listening to educational material during that time.
And he absorbed new management strategies from that audio, applied them at his job, earned a promotion, got a significant raise.
And his marriage is thriving because he's bringing positive energy home.
Brad, meanwhile, is failing at work. He feels miserable, and his marriage is actively deteriorating.
And Larry, the control group.
Larry is exactly where he started, though perhaps a bit more cynical about his lack of progress.
The most critical insight here, to me, is what we can call the ripple effect.
Yes, the ripple effect is vital to understand, because the compounding behavior did not operate in a vacuum.
It cascaded.
It cascaded across entirely unrelated biological and psychological systems in Brad's life. He didn't merely put on 33.5 pounds. We have to trace the biological dominoes.
Okay, let's trace them.
Eating richer, heavier foods loaded with simple carbohydrates, those muffins and casseroles, fundamentally altered Brad's sleep architecture.
Meaning he wasn't sleeping as well.
Right. He stopped entering deep REM sleep efficiently, meaning he woke up chronically fatigued.
And that physical sluggishness directly translates to cognitive sluggishness.
Exactly. The sleep deprivation made him irritable and unfocused at the office. His productivity plummeted. His manager noticed the decline and delivered negative feedback.
Which stresses him out.
That professional reprimand spiked his cortisol levels, inducing stress. And how does a brain wired for instant gratification handle stress?
It seeks dopamine.
So Brad's self-soothed with more comfort food and more alcohol. His energy tanked even further.
And when his energy tanks, he stops wanting to go on evening walks with his wife. He just wants to sit in front of that new massive TV.
Which triggers a psychological domino effect in the marriage. His wife interprets his withdrawal not as physical exhaustion, but as a lack of interest in her.
She feels neglected.
To protect her own emotional state, she withdraws in return. She starts spending more time away from the house with her friends.
And Brad senses the growing chasm between them.
But because he lacks the self-awareness to recognize that his own micro-choices, the extra calories, the television, the lack of movement, are the genesis of the problem.
He projects the blame onto her.
He starts picking at her faults. The marital strife compounds exponentially. Brad's entire life unravels.
And the undeniable root cause was a surplus of 125 calories and a larger screen in his living room.
When you lay it out like that, it's terrifying.
It reminds me of an ultra marathon. Like, if you watch a 100-mile foot race, the elite runners might be practically neck and neck for 99 miles.
Right.
The person who ultimately wins doesn't run twice as fast as the person in second place for the whole race. They aren't outputting vastly superior energy.
They simply maintain a fractional, almost imperceptible edge in their pacing and consistency.
Exactly. They only truly pull ahead and demonstrate dominance in the final fraction of a mile. The results are completely invisible for hours, and then right at the finish line, they're definitive.
And because society only pays attention at the finish line, we label the winner an overnight success.
We completely ignore the 940 days of reading 10 pages and skipping the mayonnaise that actually produced the victory.
We do. So if this math is so bulletproof and the biological and psychological mechanisms are this predictable, it forces a very uncomfortable question.
Why don't we all just emulate Scott?
Right. If the barrier between a ruined marriage and a thriving one is just 125 calories in a short walk, why is it so incredibly difficult for us to execute?
Because for the vast majority of our lives, we are completely asleep at the wheel.
We are entirely unconscious of the micro decisions we are making.
It's so true. I mean, nobody wakes up on a Tuesday morning, looks in the mirror and declares, my intention today is to begin sabotaging my career and initiating the slow collapse of my marriage.
Nobody intends to file for bankruptcy or develop a chronic lifestyle disease. As Hardy frames it, elephants don't bite, mosquitoes do.
Mosquitoes do. I love that.
We are constantly on the lookout for the elephants, the massive, dramatic blunders. But it is never the giant mistakes that take us down.
It's the tiny, seemingly inconsequential mosquito bites that we suffer while sleepwalking through our routines. It's grabbing a handful of chips in the break room when you aren't even hungry just because they are there.
Or letting an algorithmic feed steal 2 hours of your evening when you intended to prep for a crucial client pitch.
Or blurting out a tiny knee-jerk lie to your spouse just to avoid a 5-minute uncomfortable conversation. Mosquito bites.
This phenomenon requires us to deeply examine the psychology of victimhood and what it actually means to take 100% responsibility.
Because if you survey 100 people on the street and ask, do you take responsibility for your life? Almost all of them will be offended by the question.
They'll insist that of course they do.
But if you observe their actual operational behavior, the reality is starkly different, isn't it?
Completely different. They blame macroeconomic conditions for their business failing. They blame traffic on the interstate for being late to a meeting.
They blame their teenager's attitude for their own loss of emotional control.
They're highly skilled at pointing the finger at every external variable imaginable, everywhere but the mirror.
And the psychology behind that is fascinating to me.
Well, blame is a defense mechanism. It's there to protect the ego, but it comes at a terrible cost.
What's the cost?
The moment you blame the traffic for your tardiness, you are literally surrendering your power to the traffic. You are declaring that you are a passive object acted upon by the world.
So you're helpless.
You've made yourself helpless.
Yeah.
But if you adopt a stance of 100% responsibility, the narrative changes.
You say, I am fully aware that unpredictable traffic exists in this city. I should have built in a 20-minute buffer and left earlier.
Exactly. The moment you take total ownership, not necessarily for the external event itself, but for how you respond to and prepare for it, you liberate yourself from victimhood. You reclaim your agency.
I want to push on how this applies to relationships, because the book introduces the 1,000 rule, and it completely subverts conventional relationship therapy wisdom.
It really does. Hardy recounts being at a seminar at 18 years old, and the speaker posed a question to the room.
What is the ratio of shared responsibility in making a relationship work?
Naturally, the intuitive answer that most teenagers and even adults offer is 50-50.
Right. It appeals to our sense of fairness and equity. Both partners meet in the middle.
Or the slightly more cynical answer of 51-49, implying you always have to be willing to compromise just a little bit more than the other person.
But the speaker went to the whiteboard and wrote 1,000.
1,000. The premise is that you have to be willing to give 100% of the effort with absolutely zero expectation of receiving anything in return.
Which sounds completely unbalanced.
It sounds like a recipe for getting taken advantage of. But the psychological rationale is that any relationship left to a 50-50 chance or managed via a ledger of shared duties is inherently vulnerable.
Because if you're constantly auditing your partner to see if they fulfilled their 50%, you've created a transactional dynamic.
And transactional dynamics inevitably breed scorekeeping. And scorekeeping inevitably breeds resentment.
Hardy actually operationalized this theory in his own marriage in a way that I found brilliant. He called it Thanksgiving year-round.
Yes. He decided to unilaterally apply the 1,000 rule.
So for an entire year, he maintained a secret journal. Every single day, without fail, he forced himself to identify and write down at least one thing he appreciated about his wife.
It could be profound, or it could be incredibly mundane.
Like the specific way she played with their dogs or a meal she prepared.
A subtle choice in how she styled her hair or how she supported a friend in crisis.
Consider the cognitive mechanics of what he was doing here. By mandating that he physically write down a positive attribute every day, he was engineering a new cognitive filter.
Because the human brain has a natural negativity bias. We're evolved to spot threats and annoyances.
Right. So by forcing this daily exercise, he trained his brain to actively hunt for the good in his partner.
When your neurological baseline is aggressively calibrated to search for things to appreciate, it completely overrides the petty, trivial annoyances that might normally trigger a fight.
And the outcome was exactly what you would expect on one level, but totally surprising on another.
When he presented the journal to her the following Thanksgiving, she was deeply moved, naturally.
But Hardy noted that the person who underwent the most radical transformation wasn't his wife.
It was him.
Because his internal monologue was constantly focused on her positive traits, it fundamentally altered his external behavior.
He engaged with her with more patience, more affection, and more grace.
And here is the compounding loop. Because he was treating her exponentially better, she naturally responded to him with more warmth and affection.
Which in turn provided him with even more material for the journal. It created a self-sustaining upward spiral in their marriage.
It's beautiful. But let's pause here and introduce a critical stress test to this concept of 100% responsibility.
Okay.
Because it's very easy to own your wins. It is highly manageable to take full responsibility when you are safely writing affirmations in a gratitude journal about a spouse you already love.
Sure.
But what happens when the external variable isn't traffic or a mildly annoying habit? What happens when you are legitimately wronged? Imagine someone maliciously, intentionally defrauds you. Or a drunk driver hits your car. Does a person still have to take 100% responsibility when they are the undeniable victim of someone else's catastrophic negligence or malice?
That's the heavy question.
Isn't that just victim blaming masquerading as empowerment?
It is the ultimate philosophical hurdle of this framework. But if we look closely at the distinction, taking responsibility is not the same as accepting blame or fault for the initial event.
Okay, separate blame and responsibility.
Let's examine this through Hardy's own experience, a lesson he learned at what he calls UHK, the University of Hard Knocks.
Early in his career, right?
Yes. He was invited to partner in a startup venture. He invested a massive amount of his own capital and worked tirelessly for nearly 2 years.
And what happened?
Ultimately, he uncovered that his business partner had completely mismanaged the operations and squandered all the cash reserves.
Hardy lost over $330,000.
330 grand. That is a life-altering amount of money.
The default human response to that level of betrayal is litigation. Most people would spend the next 5 years of their life and another 100 grand in legal fees trying to destroy that partner in court to exact justice.
And they would feel entirely justified in doing so.
But Hardy chose not to sue.
He chose to take 100% responsibility for the loss.
No, why would he do that?
Because fault looks backward at who caused the damage. But responsibility looks forward at who has the power to learn from it and move on.
Wow.
Hardy recognized that he made the autonomous choice to enter into the partnership. He failed to perform adequate due diligence on the partner's character and track record.
And most importantly, he failed to inspect what he was expecting. He didn't audit the financials diligently enough while the business was running. I see the distinction. By admitting his own systemic failures in the process, he regains control.
Exactly. If he blames the partner, he is a victim who was robbed.
But if he takes responsibility for his poor oversight, he is a businessman who paid a $330,000 tuition fee to learn a critical lesson about due diligence.
By taking full ownership, he refused to surrender another year of his life and endless emotional energy to a toxic legal battle.
He integrated the lesson, absorbed the blow, and moved forward to generate new wealth with a sharper set of rules.
So the utility of taking 100% responsibility is that it forces you to become actively aware of the choices you're making in the present moment, so you don't repeat the errors.
But you cannot take responsibility for choices you are blind to. If we are all sleepwalking through our mosquito bites, we need a mechanism to wake us up.
We need an alarm clock.
Which introduces the ultimate secret weapon of the compound effect, the scorecard.
The scorecard. It relies on a fundamental law of performance. You cannot manage, alter, or improve a metric until you actively measure it.
And the practicality of this is striking. Hardy shares a story from his early 20s during his initial real estate boom.
He was generating massive income.
But when he sat down with his accountant, he was hit with a reality check. He owed over $100,000 in back taxes.
And he didn't have the liquidity to pay it.
He had burned through all the cash, and he genuinely had no idea where it had gone. He was hemorrhaging money without any conscious awareness.
So his accountant prescribed a brutal but necessary intervention.
He instructed Hardy to carry a small, physical notepad in his back pocket and record every single cent he spent for 30 consecutive days.
Not just the major purchases.
Right. If he bought a pack of gum, he wrote it down. If he put 50 cents of air in his tires at a gas station, it went in the ledger.
I love this because the genius of the notepad isn't just the data collection. It's the deliberate introduction of friction.
Hardy noted that within days, he found himself resisting impulse purchases simply because he did not want to endure the annoyance of pulling out the notepad, finding a pen, and logging the transaction.
The physical act of writing created a mandatory cognitive pause between the impulse and the execution.
That cognitive pause is where habit change actually occurs.
And when you force yourself to look at the numbers, it compels you to confront a concept that completely changes how you view resources, the future value of money.
We understand that compound interest works positively for investments, but we forget it works just as aggressively against us with expenditures.
If we assume a standard market return of around 8% over a long horizon, every single dollar you spend today represents roughly $5 of lost future wealth in 20 years.
It's the fundamental principle of opportunity cost, but applied at a micro-behavioral level. Let's look at how that math actually functions in daily life.
Let's take the classic example of a $4 daily coffee habit.
Okay, $4 a day.
In the moment, your brain justifies it. It's only $4. I work hard, I deserve a treat.
Sure.
But if you apply the future value multiplier, that $4 compounded over 20 years doesn't cost you $4.
What does it cost?
The cumulative loss of capital and compound interest means that habit literally costs your future self $51,833.79.
51 grand for coffee.
The numbers are sobering.
You walk into a big box store and you see a crepe maker on sale for $50. The microwave mentality says, what a steal, it's only $50.
But through the lens of the scorecard and future value, that piece of kitchen equipment is actually costing you $250.
You are forced to look at the item and ask, is the temporary novelty of making crepes on a Sunday worth extracting $250 from my retirement account?
And the answer is almost universally no, and the item stays on the shelf.
We accept this level of microscopic tracking in elite performance arenas without question. Think about Olympic athletes.
An Olympic sprinter includes nutritionists who track every single macro and micronutrient. They analyze video to measure every millimeter of their stride and the angle of their foot strike.
Professional golfers rely on complex statistical models detailing their performance with every specific club, on different species of grass across varying weather conditions.
They track it relentlessly because their physical performance is an incredibly valuable commodity.
So the challenge is, why wouldn't we treat our own lives, our financial stability, and our physical health with that same reverence? Why wouldn't we treat our own trajectory as a commodity worth measuring?
Elite performers are elite trackers. The data proves it. If you look at the PGA Tour, the statistical difference in average score between the number 1 ranked golfer in the world and the number 10 ranked golfer is often just 1.9 strokes per tournament.
That's nothing.
It is roughly a 2.7% difference in actual execution. However, the difference in financial reward is astronomical.
Because the number 1 golfer might pull in over $10 million in prize money and endorsements.
While the number 10 golfer makes a fraction of that, a 2.7% edge in performance yields a 500% advantage in outcomes. That is the compound effect visualized.
So the immediate actionable challenge coming out of this concept is simple. Pick just one singular habit, one specific area of your life you are struggling with.
If you want to lose weight, you don't need a complex diet. You just need to track every single item you consume.
If you want to get out of debt, track every penny. And crucially, don't rely on an automated app that quietly syncs with your credit card in the background.
Because that removes the friction.
Carry a physical notepad and a pen and manually write it down for 21 days.
3 weeks is the recognized neurological benchmark to begin laying down new neural pathways for a habit.
Now, the initial phase will be deeply uncomfortable. During the first week, you will likely experience denial and shock at the sheer volume of calories or capital that is quietly leaking out of your life.
But by the 3rd week, that heightened awareness will actively preempt your choices. You will bypass the vending machine specifically to avoid the chore of logging the candy bar.
But let's follow the timeline forward. Let's assume you do the work. You carry the notepad, you embrace the friction, you track the metrics, and you start winning.
You're succeeding.
The debt is cleared, the weight is gone, the business is scaling. You have achieved success. The book points out a massive hidden trap waiting right at the finish line. What happens to human psychology when we finally succeed?
We immediately begin to misattribute the cause of our success. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures, and we tend to get very superstitious about outcomes.
We look at a massive win and attribute it to good luck, or we look at a failure and write it off as bad luck.
But Hardy argues that luck is an equal opportunity distributor. Luck is constantly flowing around all of us.
Richard Branson has spoken extensively on this. People constantly approach him and say, "Sir Richard, you are incredibly lucky to have built the Virgin Empire."
And his response is essentially, yes, I am, but so are you.
If you live in a free society, if you have your health, if you have access to the internet, you are swimming in luck. The differentiator is not the presence of luck, it is your capacity to harvest it.
We can deconstruct Branson's philosophy into a very concrete operational formula for luck. It breaks down into 4 variables.
Let's hear them.
Preparation plus attitude plus opportunity plus action equals luck.
Let's analyze the components of that formula. Preparation is the baseline.
It is your commitment to personal growth, expanding your skill set, accumulating knowledge, and building a network, so that when a moment of serendipity occurs, you possess the actual bandwidth and capability to capitalize on it.
Attitude involves your cognitive filter. If you operate with a pessimistic, closed mindset, you will literally fail to perceive an opportunity standing in front of you.
Opportunity itself is the external variable, the chance meeting, the market shift, the sudden opening.
And finally, action is the execution phase.
This is the bottleneck where most people fail. They see the opportunity, they are prepared for it, but they lack the courage or discipline to execute.
But once you run that formula and achieve the desired outcome, a dangerous gravitational pull takes hold. The book highlights the phrase, "nothing fails like success," which sounds like an oxymoron on the surface.
It sounds paradoxical, but historical and economic data validate it constantly. Complacency, born directly from success, is the great destroyer.
It's the rot that brings down massive historical empires. The Romans, the Greeks, the Spanish all reached peak dominance, grew comfortable, abandoned the disciplines that built them, and collapsed.
It is the exact same mechanism that explains why second and third generation wealth usually evaporates.
Because the founding generation builds the fortune through intense, agonizing discipline and sacrifice, they pass the abundance to their children.
But the children never had to undergo the friction required to build the character necessary to maintain the wealth. They lack the foundational habits, so they squander it.
There is a highly relatable micro example of this in the book regarding a restaurant in San Diego. It perfectly illustrates how success masks decay.
Oh, the San Diego restaurant story. That's a powerful one.
This restaurant opens up in a prime location right on the beach. In its first year, it is a flawless operation.
The owner is paranoid about failing, so they are hypervigilant.
The hostess is incredibly warm, the waitstaff is attentive, the manager visits every single table to ensure satisfaction, and the kitchen's quality control is absolute perfection.
Word spreads. And soon, people are waiting over an hour just to get a table. They have achieved total success.
And the moment they realize they have won, the complacency begins to seep in.
The staff begins to take the endless line of customers for granted. The hostess develops a slightly arrogant attitude because she knows people will wait regardless of how she treats them.
The servers become complacent, showing up slightly disheveled and offering curt service.
The kitchen staff, overwhelmed by the volume, starts cutting minor corners on plating and ingredient prep.
And the timeline of ruin is shockingly fast. Within 18 months, this absolute goldmine of a business goes completely bankrupt.
They did not fail despite their success. The thesis is that they failed because of their success.
The influx of money and popularity clouded their perspective. They abandoned the tiny, unglamorous daily habits that actually created the exceptional experience, and the compound effect simply reversed its polarity and tore the business down.
This presents a major dilemma. If success naturally and predictably breeds this kind of toxic complacency, how do we actively fight against the comfort of our own achievements?
How does a person maintain their edge when the original threat of failure is gone?
The only reliable defense against the gravity of complacency is a deep structural understanding of how human habits actually function.
Because according to psychological research, roughly 95% of everything we feel, think, do, and achieve is the result of a learned habit.
95%. That implies that almost our entire existence, our reactions, our daily routines, our financial decisions, is running on an automated script.
We are barely conscious for most of our day.
Precisely. We are born with baseline physiological instincts, but our behavioral responses are entirely learned habits etched into the basal ganglia of the brain.
And to illustrate the neurological stubbornness of these habits, Hardy shares a parable of a wise teacher walking through a forest with a young student.
The teacher stops near a tiny green sprout, just breaking the surface of the soil, and instructs the boy to pull it up.
The boy reaches down and pinches it out of the dirt easily with 2 fingers.
They continue walking, and the teacher points to a knee-high sapling. The boy has to brace himself and yank a bit harder, but the sapling yields, roots and all.
Next, the teacher indicates a mature, well-developed evergreen tree, roughly the same height as the boy. Now it's a battle.
The boy has to throw his entire body weight into it, dig around the base, and use rocks and sticks as leverage. After intense, exhausting effort, he finally pries the root ball out of the earth.
And finally, the teacher walks up to a massive, towering, ancient oak tree with roots as thick as a person's torso. He tells the boy to pull it up.
The boy just looks at the sheer mass of the tree and says, "I'm sorry, I can't. It's impossible."
And the teacher replies, "You have just demonstrated the power that habits will have over your life."
The underlying neuroscience aligns perfectly with this parable. The older a habit is, the thicker the neural pathways become. The roots grow deeper into the subconscious, and the behavioral loop becomes harder to uproot.
Some destructive habits become so deeply ingrained, so completely integrated into a person's identity, that they stop even attempting to fight them. They just accept the oak tree.
This brings us face to face with the instant gratification trap, because we like to view ourselves as highly evolved, rational creatures.
We fully understand the long-term data. We know that eating an entire cake will spike our insulin and store fat. We know that doom scrolling for 3 hours will compromise our sleep and damage our career prospects.
So if we possess the rational knowledge, why do we continually water the bad oak trees?
Because our prefrontal cortex, the rational planning center of the brain, is constantly being hijacked by our evolutionary biology.
We evolved in environments where calories were scarce and immediate survival was the only metric that mattered. Consequently, our brains prioritize immediate dopamine hits over abstract future consequences.
The negative consequence of the bad habit is delayed, which makes it feel unreal to the primitive brain. Think about it. If taking a single bite of a fast food burger caused your chest to seize up in an instant agonizing heart attack, you would drop the burger and never touch fast food again.
If smoking one cigarette instantly mutated the skin on your face into a heavily wrinkled 80-year-old texture, the tobacco industry would collapse overnight.
But the biological bill doesn't come due instantly. The heart attack happens 20 years later. The emphysema happens 30 years later.
The payoff of the destructive habit is immediate and highly rewarding, while the punishment is relegated to a vague, distant future.
Which is why relying on willpower in the moment is a losing strategy. We have to override the biological impulse by clearly visualizing the long-term trajectory.
A helpful framework is the aviation analogy. Consider a commercial airliner taking off from Los Angeles International Airport, flight planned for New York City.
If the pilot is sitting on the tarmac and adjusts the heading of the nose just 1 single degree off course, a shift that is completely invisible to the passengers and imperceptible to the naked eye, what is the ultimate result?
Over the span of a 3,000-mile journey, that microscopic 1-degree error compounds relentlessly. The plane does not land in New York.
It misses the target entirely and lands 150 miles away in Albany, New York, or Dover, Delaware.
Exactly. The initial shift is microscopic, but the geographic destination is radically altered. And this compounding trajectory works just as powerfully in the positive direction.
We can look at the career of Larry Bird as a prime example of leveraging the mighty oak of a positive habit. Larry Legend, universally recognized as one of the greatest basketball players in the history of the sport.
Right. But if you analyze his physical metrics, Bird was not known as the most naturally gifted athlete. He wasn't the fastest player on the court, and he certainly wasn't out-jumping the competition.
By purely genetic standards, he should not have dominated the era the way he did. How did he bridge the gap?
He weaponized his habits. Growing up, his non-negotiable daily routine was to shoot 500 free throws every single morning before school started.
500 shots, day in and day out, regardless of how he felt.
He utilized the compound effect of that specific grueling repetitive action to physically wire his nervous system for accuracy, allowing him to outshoot and outplay opponents who possessed far more natural physical talent.
Okay, so we understand the gravity of habits. We know we need to uproot the destructive saplings and plant positive ones.
But anyone who has ever aggressively committed to a New Year's resolution knows the grim reality.
If you attempt to rewrite a deeply ingrained neural pathway using purely rational willpower, you are going to fail. You will tap out by the second week of February. Willpower is fundamentally insufficient for long-term change.
Willpower is dead. It is a biologically finite resource subject to what psychologists call ego depletion. Every time you resist a temptation or make a complex decision, you drain that cognitive battery.
Trying to fight a deeply rooted, dopamine-driven habit using only conscious willpower is like trying to keep a hungry grizzly bear out of your picnic basket by covering it with a paper napkin. It might work for 3 seconds, but the bear is going to win.
You need a force multiplier. You need what Hardy calls why power.
I power. The book presents a brilliant thought experiment to demonstrate exactly how this force multiplier works. Let's run this scenario. Imagine I place a wooden plank on the ground right in front of you. It's 10 inches wide and 30 feet long.
Okay.
I offer you a simple proposition. If you walk from one end of this plank to the other, I will hand you a crisp $20 bill. Do you take the deal?
Absolutely. It takes 5 seconds, involves zero risk, and it's an easy $20.
Okay, we move to scenario 2. I take that exact same 30-foot wooden plank, but this time I suspend it high in the air, bridging the gap between the rooftops of 2 100-story skyscrapers.
Oh boy.
The wind is howling, the drop is fatal. Now, I hold up the $20 bill. Will you walk across that plank?
Not a chance. You would have to be clinically insane to risk your life for $20. The risk-to-reward ratio is broken.
Exactly. But now we introduce scenario 3. The plank is still suspended between the 2 skyscrapers. The wind is still howling. But on the opposite roof, a fire has broken out. And your child is trapped in the flames on that roof. Now, do you walk across the plank?
Instantly. Without a fraction of a second of hesitation, you are sprinting across that plank. The danger doesn't even register.
So we have to analyze what just occurred neurologically and psychologically. The physical parameters of the risk did not change one iota.
The plank is the exact same width. The fall is just as deadly.
What completely altered your behavior was the why. When the underlying why is massive enough, the how and the fear and the friction becomes completely irrelevant.
This thought experiment exposes a critical flaw in how most people approach goal setting. The vast majority set targets based on external material acquisitions. They want to hit $1 million in revenue. They want to buy a Mercedes. They want a certain title.
But material milestones are weak fuel. They will not sustain you when you are cognitively depleted, bored, and facing the grueling, monotonous daily grind required to compound actual success.
To quote Tony Robbins, success without fulfillment is failure. You can acquire the cars and the cash and still feel entirely hollow. Your why has to be tethered to your deepest core values.
I completely agree with the necessity of a deep driver, but I want to introduce some nuance here. The narrative of finding your why is often painted in these pristine, noble, humanitarian colors, doing it for your children or to change the world.
Right.
But if we look at the actual biographies of hyper-successful people, sometimes the fuel isn't noble at all. Sometimes the initial thrust required to break orbit is born out of dark, messy, unhealed emotions. It can be born of intense frustration, spite, or outright anger.
That is a very astute observation, and the text supports it. Hardy brings up Pete Carroll, one of the most successful football coaches in history.
Right.
If you examine Carroll's initial drive to achieve greatness, it wasn't born purely from an esoteric love of the sport. It was deeply rooted in the fact that he was a small, scrawny kid who was chronically overlooked and underestimated.
He developed a massive chip on his shoulder.
His why was a desperate, burning need to fight tooth and nail to prove to everyone that he belonged on that field.
Or look at Sir Anthony Hopkins. He is undeniably one of the greatest actors of our generation. But his origin story isn't a joyful pursuit of the arts.
As a child, he suffered from undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD. He was marginalized by his teachers, labeled a problem child, and felt entirely overshadowed by his academically brilliant cousins.
He felt profoundly rejected by society. He took that deep, burning anger and resentment toward all the authority figures who belittled him, and he weaponized it.
He used that rage to fuel an absolute obsessive commitment to mastering the craft of acting just to prove them wrong.
But this is where I have to push back on the sustainability of this model. We know the physiological toll that anger and resentment take on the body. Pumping chronic cortisol and adrenaline through your system to fuel your workday is a recipe for adrenal fatigue and cardiovascular issues.
Yes.
Is harboring that kind of hate or constantly needing an enemy to prove wrong ultimately toxic?
Yes.
Doesn't relying on spite eventually eat away at the very success you were trying to build?
It is a profound risk, and
Right.
if left unchecked, yes, it will consume you. But we have to view this through the lens of physics.
Okay, physics.
Escaping the gravitational pull of your old destructive habits requires an immense amount of initial energy. In the context of generating that initial escape velocity, fuel is fuel.
Anger, spite, and the need to prove a detractor wrong are incredibly dense, high-octane fuels.
As long as you are channeling that intense emotional energy into positive, legal, and constructive action like mastering a craft or building a business, it can be highly effective for getting off the launch pad.
So it's a booster rocket, not the main engine.
Exactly. The booster rocket of anger gets you into orbit. But you cannot run a long-term trajectory on spite.
Over time, as you achieve competency and success, your why must mature. It has to evolve into a more sustainable, purpose-driven fuel like providing generational security for your family or giving back to a community.
But in the beginning, if the desire to prove your skeptical former boss wrong is the only thing that gets you out of bed at 4:30 a.m. to hit the gym or write code, you use it.
That makes a lot of sense. You transition the fuel source once you have altitude. So assuming you have harnessed your Y power and the engine is roaring, you now have to direct that energy. You need absolute clarity on your targets. You have to transform into a goal-seeking missile.
And becoming a goal-seeking missile requires a basic understanding of how the human brain processes environmental data.
Every single day, your brain is bombarded with billions of sensory inputs, visual data, auditory signals, tactile sensations. If your conscious mind had to process all of it, you would experience a psychotic break.
To preserve your sanity, your brain utilizes a filtering mechanism to actively ignore roughly 99.9% of that data. It only permits you to consciously perceive what it determines is strictly relevant to your survival or your current focus.
When you engage in deep goal setting, you are not just writing wishes on a piece of paper. You are writing new code for that neurological filter. You are giving your brain a new set of instructions on what to look for.
This biological mechanism completely demystifies the law of attraction. Culturally, the law of attraction is often peddled as this esoteric, mystical voodoo.
The pop culture version suggests that if you just sit on your couch, close your eyes, and visualize checks arriving in your mailbox, the universe will magically rearrange itself to manifest wealth into your life.
Which, functionally speaking, is nonsense. The reality of the law of attraction is firmly rooted in biology. It is the reticular activating system, or the RAS, at work.
The RAS is a bundle of nerves at our brainstem that acts as the ultimate gatekeeper of information.
The classic example is the new car phenomenon. You decide you want to purchase a very specific make, model, and color of a car. Suddenly, as you drive down the highway, you see that exact car everywhere.
Did the universe magically spawn thousands of those vehicles overnight just to validate your desire? Of course not. Those cars were always on the highway. Your brain simply categorized them as irrelevant background noise before, so it filtered them out of your conscious awareness.
But the moment you anchored that specific car as a goal, you programmed your RAS to prioritize it. It pulled the data through the filter.
Precisely. When you take the time to write down a clear, hyper-specific goal, you are calibrating your RAS.
Suddenly, you start noticing resources, passing conversations, and market opportunities that can help you achieve that goal. Those opportunities were always in your periphery, but you were functionally blind to them because your filter wasn't tuned to their frequency.
And understanding that biological filter leads to the ultimate paradigm shift of the book. Jim Rohn, who is a massive mentor to Darren Hardy, famously stated, "Success is something you attract by the person you become."
When most people engage in goal setting, their default framework is to ask, what do I have to do to get this? But the ultimate compounding question is far more demanding. Who do I have to become?
Hardy's own personal life provides a masterclass anecdote for this principle. When he reached a point where he was ready to marry and settle down, he approached it with his usual intense methodology.
He sat down and wrote out an exhaustive list of the attributes of his perfect partner. He didn't just jot down a few physical preferences. He generated 40 pages of highly detailed criteria: her moral character, her financial habits, her family values, her sense of humor.
The natural next step for a high achiever would be to take that 40-page checklist out into the dating market and aggressively hunt for this mythological perfect woman. But he stopped.
He stopped, looked at his exhaustive list, and inverted the focus. He asked himself a much more difficult confrontational question. What kind of man would a woman of this extraordinary caliber actually be looking for?
When he audited himself against that standard, he realized he fell short. He did not currently possess the emotional maturity, the specific habits, or the refined traits necessary to attract and sustain a relationship with the woman he had just described.
So he pivoted. He wrote a second 40-page document. But this one detailed all the character traits, behavioral shifts, and personal growth milestones he needed to achieve.
He stopped hunting for the goal and went to work compounding his own personal development. And the result? By actively becoming the exact match for his goal, he naturally attracted his wife, Georgia, who embodied the traits on his initial list.
That is the ultimate distillation of the compound effect. You do not chase success. Chasing implies that success is fleeing from you.
Instead, you architect your habits, you leverage time, and you engineer yourself into the exact type of person who naturally catches it.
It is a complete recalibration of how we approach our daily lives.
Let's recap the terrain we have covered today. We started by identifying the toxic microwave mentality and contrasting it with the gritty, responsible reality of showing bone.
We unpacked the invisible, exponential math of the magic penny, proving that consistency over time creates radical divergence.
We confronted our sleepwalking habits and recognized that the tiny mosquito bites of our daily choices dictate our destiny.
We embraced the friction of the scorecard to track our metrics and avoid the historical trap of complacency that ruins successful empires.
We swapped out our fragile willpower for a 100-story plank-level Y power. And finally, we learned to hack our biological filters, shifting our focus from what we have to do to who we must become.
And the most immediate application of this philosophy applies to this exact moment. The sheer act of dedicating your time to consume this deep dive, choosing to engage with dense analytical concepts rather than seeking cheap algorithmic dopamine, is a small, smart choice.
You have actively initiated the math of the compound effect in your own life today, but as we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final provocative concept to mull over.
If the neuroscience is accurate, and 95% of your life is dictated by automated habit loops, and if the invisible mathematical gravity of the compound effect is always active, whether you are meticulously tracking it or completely oblivious to it, what is the hidden trajectory of the very next micro-decision you make the moment this audio ends?
Every single choice is an alteration of your flight path. Are you pointing the nose of your plane toward the New York City of your ambitions? Or are you drifting one invisible, unchecked degree at a time toward the Delaware of regret?
Are you actively building a mansion, or are you feeding the termites?
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. We will see you on the next deep dive.